So we are back on now live, and I do apologize for that, because what I'm going to have to do now, there's going to be two parts. You're going to be the only guest who's got two parts to the show on YouTube.
Very good.
Go Bruce, go. That's all I'm going to say. So what I'm going to say now to the viewers, if by chance we do lose the link again, I spoke to Bruce just a short while ago, we will reschedule this show at another date, and rather than keep trying to get back online, it's not fair to Bruce, obviously, and it's not fair to potential viewers. So I've just sent out a message to say we're back online. I'm just going to do one other, and I do apologize for viewers that I'm doing this while we speak. But as I say, this has never actually happened to me before. Back online with Bruce Percy. There we go. So back to where we were then, Bruce, because basically you told us about the fact that you're going to do your trip out to Australia after you've basically hit the wall with your broadcasting, with your music.
Yeah.
So you've decided to go to Australia, and obviously by the sound of things, you had some visitors who were complimenting you on your photography on the walls and that. What camera did you have at the time?
I'd actually bought a camera when I was about 22, and it was the very first Canon EOS that came out. It was the 650, and a friend of mine that I was at high school with, my friend Craig, he'd turned up at my house one day with a Pentax ME Super and a book of Ansel Adams. He'd just gone to college, and he showed me this book, and I'd never heard of Ansel Adams before, which is kind of a really weird concept now to think about. And I'd liked photography, but I would find that once in a blue moon I'd make a nice image, and I didn't quite know what I'd done right. And so I had those one or two really nice images that I didn't know how I got them right up on the wall. Yeah. And they were the things that my friends would usually compliment me on when I was in the house. But you know, I think this kind of an interesting thing. For me, I just think sometimes you don't see it coming. You know, you don't see where you're going yourself, and I think it was staring me in the face. When I look back on it now, and I think, well, I had all these pictures up on my wall that I'd been taking since I was in my mid-20s that my friends were complimenting me on, and I didn't see it myself. I didn't see it as a possible avenue, which I find really quite fascinating, because you can be so focused on thinking you're one thing. And if somebody had said to me at the time, how would you define yourself? I would have said, well, would love to think of myself as a musician. And whereas now, if somebody said to me, how would you tell yourself? Well, I try to be more open about that and to say, well, I'm a creative person. So maybe at the moment the vehicle is photography. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, sorry. I'm listening to you.
I was wondering if...
No, I'm listening to you. If you can see me down in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm still here. Don't you worry. Poor fella, he's really going through it here. This is not fair.
I'm very open to the idea that I don't know if you caught the bit where I was talking about how I'm very careful about making sure that I nurture the creative aspects of the photography and trying to make sure that I don't burn out with it, because I did this before, and I did it with music, and I got to the point that I couldn't face coming home and sitting down and writing music anymore. And I don't want to do that with photography. So I've made a point in my blog for years talking about being kind to your creativity, and you often get people giving themselves a lot of beating themselves up about it. You know, it's that sort of, you know, everybody's got this internal voice that just, you know, gives you a bit of a hard time, whether it's, oh, I'm not good enough at my job, or I'm not good enough at this, or whatever. And the last thing you should be doing about something that you love and you enjoy is the same thing. You should not give yourself a hard go about it. And I can understand that everybody wants to aspire to be better at what they're doing, but I just think that these things they organically grow in their own way. And I remember for a long time, some of my best images were, I think it was Iceland 2004. And I think there was like 2 or 3 years where I kept thinking, I haven't done anything as good as that. And I could have so easily just beaten myself up about it. And I just decided, well, you know, it's the ebb and flow of creativity. you can't really go around measuring yourself that way, and it's a really I think it's a very destructive thing to do anyway. So because of the burnout we had with music, I'm very careful about trying to make sure that I try and keep inspired and ease off from it from time to time too. You know,
I can understand that, actually, because there's nothing worse. You go hell for leather at something, and of course you do get a little bit, dare I use the term, bored on a particular subject matter, and you think, well, you know, I'm losing my interest here. You've got to pace yourself really in something of this nature. When you were out in Australia with your, I'm assuming you're walking around Australia in a sort of terms, if you get my drift, sort of discovering Australia. Did you take many photographs while you were out there?
Well, I did, and that's the thing for me. I came home, and that's where I realised that the bug had bitten really badly for me, and that I'd always wanted to go because I've got relatives that live out there, and ever since they came to visit me when I was about 8 years old, and I remember I had a ruler, one of these kind of really twist. It gets, you know, it's got like a 3D thing. It gives you a different picture. Yeah. And all these landmarks around Australia, and I really wanted to go, and I still want to go back to Australia because I really love the landscape and especially the Northern Territories. All these areas I find quite magnetic, really, and so I can't remember what the question was again. What was the question?
Did you take much photography while you're out in Australia?
Oh, right. So yes, I did. I took a lot, and I came home and I got them all printed up. And I've still got this really nice book at home with all these Cibachromes in them, all these 35mm film images that I took at the time. And it was the typical thing that, you know, all your friends look at them and they all say, "Wow, they're great. You should be professional." And everybody gets told that. I think, you know, all your friends and family want to encourage you. I never had any aspirations to do this as a job, really. It just seemed to sort of just move that way and evolve in its own way, and I think that's such an interesting thing. But yes, so I took a lot of photographs that year, 2000. Came home and knew photography was, this is it now. I found a new avenue to explore creatively speaking, and I think about 2001 was the next. I made a quick jump up to the Mamiya 7, which is, I've got it here. This is I've actually owned about 4 of these things now because I keep breaking them. They're not exactly very robust, but they've got fantastic lenses, and it just seemed to fit my style, and it just seemed to fit me. And I sometimes when I do workshops with people, I get the feeling that some of my clients haven't really found a camera that they've really melded to yet or fallen in love with. And I think that when you do meet the right kind of camera, it seems to help you with your style. It becomes less of a barrier.
Yeah, let's talk about that camera, because I don't really know much about the Mamiya 7. Medium format camera?
Yeah, that's right. It's medium format, and so
film camera, obviously.
Yeah, it's a film camera. Yeah. I don't shoot digital. I've got a little Lumix digital camera, and I did try shooting digital for a year or two, and didn't really particularly enjoy it. And what I think is really interesting about photography now is that it's really broadened out now. For a long time, people asking me, "Have you gone digital yet?" As if there was an either or. And now I'm seeing that everybody's doing everything now. I'm getting guys turning up on trips with me that have got a darkroom at home. They're doing digital. They're doing everything. Anyway, the reason why I got this was it was really compact. It's about, well, it's kind of difficult to show you, but it's kind of, if you imagine like a Pro SLR, it's about the size of a Pro SLR. So as medium format camera bodies go, it's fairly compact. And the reason for that is it's because it's a rangefinder. There's no mirror in it. So if you're a rangefinder guy, you know exactly where I'm coming from. And I actually found 2 main purposes of this camera, why it worked so well for me, was when I moved to it, the aspect ratio, everybody says, oh, it's a 6x7 camera. It's actually, if you measure the transparency on it, it's the equivalent of a 4x5 aspect ratio.
Okay.
And I've been saying now for the last, forever now, that the aspect ratio can make a huge difference to your composition skills and how well you get on with your composition skills. And I found that when I moved to that camera, within months of getting it, it just, all of a sudden I found that everything seemed to be clicking more for me, and it was all coming in together. And the other aspect about it that I like so much is that it's a rangefinder, which means that it's an approximation. And because I can't see exactly what's coming through the screen, it's even got these little eyepieces here that if you've never seen a rangefinder before, this is a little viewfinder you've got to put on if you want to put on a wide angle. So it gives you an approximation of this is what you're probably going to get when you get home. And I actually like that because what it does is it actually forces me to try and internalize and visualize the image in my imagination. And I find that I think I'm more connected that way. I seem to work more with it. And I don't think there's anything that's better or worse than digital. But for me personally, that's one of the aspects I really like. And I think if I actually went digital tomorrow, I would probably mask off the preview screen in the back. Because
yes, I'm with it. Yeah, chimping as they call it.
Yes, chimping. But I think it's for me because I think that I trust myself. You're going blind a bit. Every time you take a shot with this, you can't check it, you can't verify it. So you have to sort of be a bit more tuned in with what's actually going on out in the composition. Saying, well, actually, did I get that rock come into the corner of the picture? Is that tone over there a little bit more distracting? This sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And also a sense of conviction. So as soon as you've clicked the shutter, you say to yourself, well, actually, it's done. I can't change it. And at some point, you have to walk away.
Yeah.
So what you've got to do is you've got to sort of build a bit of sense of trust or maybe a bit of intuition about what you're doing, and actually also accept that one thing I like about film photography is that it teaches you that you're not always going to capture the shot that you want. And I so often hear people say to me things like, "Oh, I want to make sure that I've got all the lenses that I need to capture everything that we might come across." I'm saying, well, one thing about being a photographer is learning to accept that you'll always miss shots because there's a shot happening every second.
Yes,
there's always a potential shot happening anywhere. So just get over it and just assume that, well, the stuff that I can sift out or capture, I'm going to try and capture that well.
Yeah. Talking about that camera you got there, what lens have you got on that, Bruce?
Well, this is the 50mm, which is like it's the equivalent of about 24-25mm. If you
I was going to say it's about 25mm, isn't it? 25.
Yeah,
I thought it was about a 30 or something, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, it's the thing I other liked about this camera as well was it basically there's about 6 lenses for it, but really realistically, when you buy it with the 80, the 50, and the 150. I would say that's the really good focal length range to get for it. And that's the equivalent of like a 24, 40, 50, and a 75. And I've been running with those things for well over a decade before I actually felt that I actually wanted to explore any other lenses.
It's interesting because we're obviously going to talk about a very good friend of ours, Michael Kenner, later on. I get that impression anyway. And it's interesting when we're talking about it, he uses the Hasselblad, as you know, and I think in actual fact uses that same range of lenses that you've just mentioned there for his work, and he's dedicated film photographer. In actual fact, it is interesting what you say. There are, I think we're having a sort of almost like a renaissance of getting back into film photography. Martin Bailey has just started picking up a Yashica, a D, I believe, with a twin lens reflex with 120 roll film. Talking of film, what film do you use in the Mamiya there, Bruce?
Well, it's so interesting. Like when I started printing, everybody kept asking me, "Did you try all these different papers?" And I said, "Well, I found a paper I really liked, so I stuck with it."
Yep.
And I did the same with Velvia 50. I know it's so well now that I know exactly how far I can push it when I scan it and when I manipulate it in Photoshop. I know how far I can push it when the film grain comes out, and I actually quite like the film grain when it comes out. You wouldn't expect to see Velvia with film grain, but when you're pushing it quite severely in certain areas of the transparency in a scan, digitally scanned, then you will get those kind of characteristics come out. But it's the color palette really for me. And I'm a low light shooter. If anybody's heard of Paul Wakefield, I absolutely love Paul Wakefield's work, and it just dawned on me about a year ago when his first book came out. I thought, oh, I think he's actually influenced me more than I'd imagined, because I'd actually found out that I'd subconsciously gone to a lot of the landscapes that he went to. And a friend of mine, Adrian, who does workshops with Paul, told me that Paul is actually trying to seek no light at all in his landscapes. And I looked at him and I said, well, funnily enough, that's me, because I get people in workshops saying to me, they make jokes about it, saying, oh, there's really miserable, depressing light over there. That's where you'll want to go, Bruce. Because I'm very big on the really seeking out very, very soft light. No, none of this kind of light coming through the clouds on things, and I'm actually trying to avoid the sun in the shot as well. And part of that's come because I'm a film photographer. I've got a very low latitude to the film. I've got about 3 or 4 stops or something. But what I've discovered as well is that it doesn't matter how much dynamic range you throw at something, for me anyway, the reason why you're shooting the soft light is because from a landscape photographer's point of view, it's very, very beautiful light.
Yeah.
So
one of the things with regards to that camera, has that got a light meter installed, or do you use a third-party light meter?
It does. It's very basic. It's the light meter is actually this little. You can't see it now because it's getting a bit dark. Just
if you can put a light on, that'd be great.
Yeah, in a sec.
It's one of the things that happens up in Scotland. They do have a tendency to get. Well, we're now sort of approaching autumn. Really, here we're starting to get a little bit. There we go. I can see Bruce there.
Yeah.
Is that well working? Yeah. Show us the light meter on your camera there, Bruce.
Right. Okay. So basically,
I got it.
I think it's this little window here. One of them is a rangefinder window, another one's, but it's really basic. So the way it works out, it's got the same angle of view, and so whatever lens you put on, it's not metered through the lens. So if you put a wide angle on it, it acts like a spot meter, and if you put a 150mm lens on, it acts as a center weighted.
Okay.
And I've actually tried it because I've actually got this really expensive Sekonic at home. I've got 3 of them now because I keep breaking them as well, and or they just get rained on and it's not working. But I've got the Sekonic 758, which has a really nice graph to show you the dynamic range. You can meter the sky and the ground, and it tells you what the latitude is, so you're able to work out what grad to put on. And 2 years ago, I was in Norway with a group, and the meter died on me. So I had a spare Mamiya 7 with me, so I just ended up using that as a handheld light meter, just pointing at the ground, pointing at the sky, and it was good enough. You know, it's and to be honest, I think that when the Sekonics die, I'll just use an iPhone next time because I think the light meters in those are.
Yes, I'm aware of the light meters in the iPhone. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see how that works. I haven't got I have got a film camera, but I generally concentrate using it's a 35mm. I use the meter straight from that, so I don't have a separate one.
Yeah.
Let's sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say let's talk about when you returned from Australia and you were bitten by this bug of photography. I remember coming across your videos when I was searching around for anything photography that I could find. And one particular video that came to my mind, we talked about it last night, was when you did that video when you're in Norway, where you were getting a little bit sort of confused with the time of the day because of their long hours. When did the idea of putting out the podcast and the video come about? Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think this is why I was saying to you earlier on about you should just try and term yourself as a creative person rather than a photographer or anything, because I think what that does is it sort of pigeonholes you into thinking just one way. And you know, I love how things just happen very organically for me so far. Everything I've done in my photography has never been an overly conscious decision. And I was on YouTube looking for some videos of Steve McCurry because I really like his portraiture. And I came across this video by a chap called Jake Warga, and it's called The Perfect Photo. You should go and check it. Go and watch it. And Jake's not a photographer, but he's a sort of he's a professional journalist, I think. And I got in touch with him and I said, I really liked your video. I just thought it was great. He went to Lalibela in Ethiopia, and I'd never heard of Lalibela until that moment. And I said to him, how did you do this? And he said, well, you know, just write a script, write down what you want to write, what want to say, and when you try and say it back, if you keep getting stuck at certain things, then it's because the sentence doesn't work or it's jamming some way. So just work on the script until it flows, and then record it and put your slideshow together with it. So I tried it, and I was just blown away. I just thought, wow, it was just such a. For me, what I got out of it was you got to relive the whole experience again, and of being somewhere. And it's like you're back there again. And so I often find that I'm saying to even like people that are on workshops with me now, I'll say to them, you know, have you ever done go and do a talk for a photographic club or something? I've done a few of them now. They're great experiences because you put a slideshow together with your music, and it's quite difficult to find the right kind of music, but when you do, it really just resonates for the whole thing. So that was it. It was really just I just wanted to try it, and I found it quite inspiring, and I felt quite inspired by it. And I thought, oh, I quite like this.
Yeah.
I quite like reliving the whole experience of the trip, and also I found that I'm quite big on the idea that I don't really want to talk too much about the techie stuff, because I think that's quite boring, to be honest. I think you can find out about the techie stuff anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think that I'd much rather just talk about the reason why we're all into photography. Really, I think it's not because of f-stops and shutter speed and stuff. It's either because most landscapes, I would assume, most landscape photographers, it usually starts off with an appreciation of landscape or the nature of being outdoors, and it moves into something else from that. Some people come from an arty background, perhaps, but I think in general, that's where it comes from it. And so I was trying to relive those experiences, and I felt there's something in that. And it was really bizarre, because what I found after a while was I had a little guest book on my website for a while, and it said, "How did you find out about me?" And anybody that was leaving a comment were all saying through iTunes, through iTunes,
Yeah.
through iTunes. And oh, right, okay. So the problem is they're quite time consuming to do. I really love doing them, and I do them, and I only want to do them when I've got something new to say or I've been somewhere brand new. So the last one I did was about the geishas in Japan, and I went to photograph the geishas over a year ago. And it's one of the problems about running a business, a workshop business, is that is actually finding time for yourself to go off and explore new places and things.
Yeah, we'll get to the workshops later, but I'm assuming the workshops came after you were doing
Right.
these videos.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was about 2009 I went full time. I'd done a few workshops before. I started doing workshops in 2007, but it was very much a sort of part-time basis. And then in 2009 I went full time. And when I was chatting to you last night, I was telling you about how I met up with David Duchemin when I was in Nepal in 2009, and he was really instrumental at helping me make a viable business out of what I do. I can't thank him enough, to be honest. David's got a fantastic business mind on his head. Really, he's a very creative person. He's quite an inspiring writer.
Yeah,
and he managed to sort of get me focused on what I was doing. So I remember that 2009, I was doing all these new things that I'd never done before. I'd never had a podcast before. I'd never had a blog before. I'd never had an online store before. And so I think basically the podcasting was all mixed up in that. I was just doing all these new things now, and I had all this free time because I was no longer an IT professional.
Yeah.
So that was it.
Let's do a screen share, Bruce, and have a look at your work. And fingers crossed, we're still live. We haven't lost any links, so fingers crossed this will show up on your screen. Can you see that okay now?
Yes, I can. Yeah,
that's lovely. So basically, for those that are listening and those that are watching, what I've got here on the screen share now is Bruce Percy's website, The Art of Adventure. And just before the show, I asked Bruce which of the portfolios would be the best one for us to just talk through some of his imagery, and he's chosen some of his latest work, Altiplano 2013. And so what I normally do in these shows, Bruce, as I explained to you yesterday, I'll just scroll through, and if you just want to talk about an image from time to time, sort of say stop, go back to this one, please just shout out. So far away, I'm in control of the screen, but you're doing the audio. How about that?
Yes. Well, let's talk about the first one then.
Yeah.
So everything in this portfolio is square, but you might have gathered I'm a bit of a Michael Kenna fan. But it's the square aspect ratio came in a very sideline way. It was a friend of mine, a Canadian friend of mine. She sort of mentioned she had an old Hasselblad in her closet, and I said, "Oh, I'll take it off you then." So, and the reason why I decided to go and shoot these in square was because I started going to Bolivia in 2009, and I found Bolivia very instrumental in pushing me in a certain stylistic direction that I wasn't really quite aware of at the time. It's so interesting when you go back and review your older work, you can actually see there's actually like direction or movement in it. And I would stress to anybody that's having difficulty trying to figure out what it is they're doing is to go back and review, because it allows you to see how far you're moving, if you're moving at all. And for me, I'd found that Bolivia was really the opening of this whole simplification of looking at pictures and looking for very, very simple compositions. And when I went back in 2013 to shoot it, this is probably my third or fourth trip here. I got here in very, very different light conditions. It's not normally foggy like this. This is at an elevation of 4,000, just over 4,000 meters, I believe, and it's a place called Laguna Colorada. It is an actual red lake, and it's I think it's an algae. It's algae that create this color of the lake, and that's all the flamingos in it. And I remember I'm not usually a telephoto shooter. I'm usually a sort of wide angle nut. I tend to go for near to far sort of compositions, and you can't get near flamingos, and I'm not a wildlife shooter by any stretch, but I remember looking at them off in the lake, and I thought it's quite foggy, it'd be quite nice to shoot them. So I remember taking this with a 250mm lens on the Hasselblad, and the reason why I was using the Hasselblad was I felt that the aspect ratio is much more of a graphic art. It's more of a graphic element than a rectangle is, and I find that you can almost plonk a square down on anything and it'll look good. If you look at anybody's website and you look at the thumbnails and they're all in square, sometimes I find the thumbnails actually more interesting than the actual full.
Yes, it's a very good point.
Good point. It's just quite graphic, so that's why I went that way. And so, you know, I didn't really. You can't really. I try not to anticipate when I go along in places now. I just try and go with what I'm being given. And it was very foggy up there. And I remember coming home and showing my South American travel friend Kathy about it. She said, it's never foggy up there. I've never seen this before. And so I feel it was it was a real gift to be there at that time.
Yeah.
For those.
Lovely, lovely image. I naturally, when I first saw it, I thought you'd been playing about in Lightroom, maybe put some filters in it and done a couple of presets and that sort of.
Oh, there's definitely a lot of work done to them. If you don't mind me talking about the whole post-processing thing, I'll just start off by saying for years, I remember doing talks for clubs and they would say, do you manipulate your work? And I always felt like it was a loaded question, as if like you're cheating if you do.
Yeah.
And now I just stand there and I just say to everybody, yes, but of course, because I think it's part and parcel of photography. And I'm so delighted now that everybody's got a copy of Lightroom and everybody's editing their work now, and they should be.
Well, when you think about it, back in the old film days, dare I say, or new film days, in your case, in the darkroom, you were manipulating the image. You were dodging and burning and all sorts of things.
Ansel Adams, if you look at his negatives, verbatim, he'd probably even say it himself that they're quite straight when they're printed verbatim. And if you look at Ansel's work as he got older, he actually started printing his skies darker and darker. He got more dramatic with his style, if you like. And I often think that if you're going to impart some style into what you're doing, it's probably going to be in the editing stage of it, really.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Obviously, the compositional elements of what you seek and what you decide to put in your camera, that's certainly one aspect of of your style, I think, because I've got a certain predisposition for certain types of shapes or curves and things like this shot here. This shot here is the desert Sololi, and I was there with a group this year, and it was the usual very tepid temperature of minus 17 degrees centigrade outside. And when we got out there, and my guide was sitting in the car, and when I got back in, he said to me, "It's freaking crazy, man," he said to me. And I said, well, yeah, but you know, the reason why we're coming here for sunrise is it's an amazing place, but this place normally isn't full of snow like this. And when I got here that year with the group, I think we were here for 10 minutes, and the guide said, my guide, Bolivian guide, Silveria, that I know quite well, she said to me, Bruce, the really bad weather front's coming, and it was really, really, really weird weather that year. They were getting. It's the dry season there in the Altiplano, so you're not supposed to be getting any rain. At high elevation, you don't get rain, you get snow. And all that happened all the time was it kept snowing. We actually found it hard to run the trip. But one of the beauties of it is that you get this unexpected vision, really. And so I was attracted to the curve in this. And I haven't done anything much to the picture, really. It's that fishbone kind of texture in the sky. It looks a little bit HDR to my eye. You know, when somebody's been with the HDR. And I remember saying to the group that I was with when I got in the car again, I said, you know, did you see that sky tonight? It was really weird. It looked like it was almost like computerized in some way, but it really was how it was that day. And yeah, and it's funny. And then you come home and you start editing it, and you see certain parallels in it. Like there's a diagonal line in the sky that's it kind of mirrors the diagonal
Yeah.
line in the snow in the foreground. And of course, there's a little smiley face down the bottom left-hand corner. He's got quite a,
Yeah, that's right. I can see it.
almost looks like a witch, you know. It's kind of a big.
Exactly. Someone with that's the weatherman watching you. I
Yeah.
tell you what, I think it's a right time for us to ask this question, which we got from my friend Hugh.
Uh-huh.
I'll read it out to you again. I did prep you on it, and I'll just read it out to remind you. So the full question is: your images generate such an emotive response through very powerful but clean and simple compositions. What is your advice for someone that, despite their best efforts and desire to simplify, find their compositions consistently cluttered and ill-defined?
Well, my theory on this one is that I think that with most things that you start off with, you always have to start off simply. You always have to start off with one or two things. And for some reason, photography seems to be the other way around, that when we go out with a camera, we tend to point at things that we find interesting, but then we get home, we find out that there's 20 other things in the picture too that we didn't quite see when we were there. And I think what we're doing is we're starting off in a very difficult stage because we're starting off with too many things in the shot. And I would just suggest to them that go somewhere where there's nothing there. That go to a beach, for example, where there's just a beach, there's just sand, there's no texture, there's no rocks. And go there at different times of the day just to learn about the light and watch the light. And go there at twilight, go there at dusk, go there at middle of the day, go there when it's foggy, go there when it's raining. I love shooting. I love shooting the rain. I've got I'm not really worried about cameras getting damaged by rain at all, and just do that, because what you'll do is you'll sort of I think the reason why hopefully the emotion will come through just by the colors and the tonal ranges that you're capturing. But you also learn that, well, if you start off with an empty beach, then just start introducing one or two things. Maybe look for a rock, but try and find a dramatic rock. Try and find a rock that's not really just any old rock, something that's quite elegant. And
Yeah.
I'm always looking for something quite graphically elegant, something that's, you know, it's. I think my photography is edging towards a sort of graphic element anyway. It's sometimes, you know, for example, this picture here, this blue picture here with that's Laguna Colorado again, but it's at twilight. And I've actually had certain participants in workshops, when we get to places that are so empty like this, they'll actually say to me, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this, because there's nothing concrete like a tree or a mountain or something to put in the frame. And I'm saying, well, it's really about shapes and patterns. Just try and find shapes and patterns to work with.
Yeah.
For example, this Laguna Colorado, this is actually the clay in the morning, and it's obviously Velvia does something nuts with the colors anyway, which I love.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested in reality, and some of my friends would vouch for that anyway, in a different sense of the word. But you know, I'm not really bothered about that. I'm more interested in what you can convey with your photography and conjure up. So and graphic lines like diagonals in the foreground there are great leading lines to sort of lead you in. And I've learned this, so I now know that every time I go somewhere where you've got sandbars or things like that, I'm actually trying to look, can I use these in the picture? Will they allow me to find an anchor point, so that basically that those lines in the foreground of that picture are what people start with and move into.
Yeah. Just a quick response. Hughes replied back, I know what I'm doing this weekend. Off to the beach. Thank you, Bruce.
Well, I do think we start off with, like, most people, I mean, like Glencoe in Scotland's very dramatic, and I find Glencoe quite difficult. When I've run workshops there with groups, I've said to them, you know, you're actually at a disadvantage being Glencoe because it's so fractured and busy. There's so much stuff there that you've actually got to really work hard to try and make sure that it all has a purpose in the frame of your camera. When you start on an empty beach and there's nothing there, you know, it's easier, I think.
It's interesting. I've just scrolled down to two images here, Bruce, where obviously taken at different times of the day. Exactly what you've just suggested to Hugh to try and do, taking photographs of the same scene, different times of the day, and capturing the light in a different way.
You know, and I'm never too sure exactly which one's the best one. So
No, exactly. No, well, I'd have both on my wall, quite honest with you.
and then I'll say, oh, well, you know what, I like them both. So
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
And so one of the things I get asked about an awful lot is that a lot of my images are quite blue, and I do. My dad even says that he thinks I've got a deficiency in my blue retina or something. I don't know, but and I say to him, well, it's a mood, it's an emotion, and Twilight is very blue. So the first top image there, that's Twilight.
Yeah.
And your eye can't see it because what we do is we've got our own built-in white balance, auto white balance.
That's right.
And that's more or less what a digital camera does when it's on auto white balance. It tries to tune out all these tones for you, which is really helpful if you're middle of the day somewhere and you don't want to color cast, but it's not helpful at twilight.
No.
And you've got to learn to understand what the light is that you're in. And so the top one that's classic twilight. And then the one below it, that's actually at sunrise. That's when the light's really starting to come up. That was actually very unusual for me because I was actually shooting right into the light there. And I remember I've got this Bolivian friend that's a tour guide, Marisol, and she was standing right next to me at the time. And I said to her, I wouldn't normally shoot this because I think the contrast's too high. And I'd shot it anyway, and I got home and I found out it came out. And I thought, well, you know, sometimes you just, I think the problem sometimes about a style is that a style can be a little bit like having handcuffs. You can become trapped by it because what I think style is that you realize what certain things that do work and don't work, and as you go down the route, you become more perfected at that. But it possibly might mean that you maybe stop experimenting so much more.
Yeah.
So you've got to. So I was quite every so often I get a bit surprised by it, and I think, well, I really need to try and shake up my. You know, I don't normally shoot towards the light. I usually shoot with the sun behind me because I'm looking for light on the landscape, and I'm looking for softer tones.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because I do remember our friend Barry, who was on your workshop up in, I believe it was in Scotland.
Yes.
And he said, there we are. He took us to, this was the story. He said, here we are, Paul. He said, he took us to this location. And he said, there's this beautiful sunrise coming out over the hills and the mountains. And he said, we all set up our cameras and tripods to face this. He said, and Bruce said, what are you doing? Turn round. And we all turned round. We all went, wow. There was something behind,
yes.
Which was, as you say, the light that was, you wanted to photograph the light behind, not towards the light.
You know, it's a balancing act with workshops because the thing about them is I can't convince somebody else to like what I like, and I can't convince, if somebody likes something, I should just let them shoot it. Yeah. And then at the same time with a workshop is you're there to try and hopefully impart something of what you understand, and hopefully people want to listen to that. So I do get that repeatedly where I'm with people and I say to them, you're actually facing the wrong way, turn the camera around. but it's so beautiful over where the sun is. And I'm saying, well, yeah, but I think it's the contrast too high, and it's, you know, because what happens is your eye has tuned out the tone. You're probably standing in the whole light is standing in is bathed in a beautiful warm glow, but you can only see the obvious stuff that's towards the sun. So that's where you go with your camera, and you think the rest of it doesn't have color. But if you shoot it and you come home, it's got very definite soft edges to it. I've got a couple of images from, if you went to my egg portfolio, it's a really old one. If you went back to archive work, at the top there, if you go to archive work.
Yeah.
And on that one, there'll be Isle of Egg. I don't know where it is now, actually. Keep going. Oh, there it is. Second row. Far right. Yeah, that's it. Now, if you keep going down, Paul, and keep going. This one here. That's it. Back up. No, one more up. That's it. That one there.
This one here?
No, the one below.
This one with the rocks. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, that one there.
They look like beached whales.
Yeah, so I was actually crawling on my hands and knees to try and get those rocks.
Yeah.
E-shaped balancing under the island. It's the Isle of Rum in the distance there. But the sun was like blazing red behind us, and everybody in the group was saying to me, "Oh, we should have been on the other side of the island today because the sun over the other side looks fantastic." And I was saying, "Yeah, but the tones are so beautiful over this way, and there's pinks and blues, all mixed up in the sky." And one of my participants, Stephen, said to me, "You've built up a fine attention to the small things," and well, it's very nice of him to say that, but I just pointed out what I could see? And I said, well, maybe for most people, they're not thinking it looks so dramatic, but usually the dramatic stuff for a camera, it doesn't work so well, and it's the more subtle stuff that the camera's picking up on.
Yeah.
And so with this image, it was all about the soft tones and the pinky blues and things like that. You know, if you've not got a calibrated monitor, and obviously through YouTube or Google, this Google platform, I'm not sure if you'll see the colors correctly, but if you went out to my website and had a look at it, you can see it's got little pinks and blues in it. It's very soft and it's very subtle.
It's interesting you mentioned actually, because one question I want to ask you about that particular photograph there. But I do remember a time when I was over on the Dutch coast, a place called excuse my Dutch friends, Noordwijkerhout or Noordwijkerhout. I was taking this photograph of the sunset, and there's this crimson and red sky and everything, and I thought, well, this is great. Really enjoying taking these photographs, waiting for the sun to really set. And I turned round, and I just couldn't believe what was happening behind me in terms of the coloration of the sky and the clouds. And so it's a very, very good point you make. That
I would like to say as well that it's always 180 degrees.
Yeah.
You get colors, and all my Bolivia shots, you get this really wonderful light at that high elevation. I've never been anywhere else like it. I spent a bit of time in a place called the Puna in Argentina recently, and the light wasn't quite the same. It really wasn't. But for some reason, every night, it's like the ground starts to light up, and it feels brighter than the sky is. And it's 180. It's always at 180 degrees to the sun. And my workshop, or sorry, tour. It's actually, I try and make a big distinction between workshops and tours, because workshops for me are very much about the teaching aspect of it, and the tours are very much about trying to get people to great places.
Yeah.
But I did see earlier on that Mike Allen said that he was going to follow this today, and so if Mike was on Bolivia with me this year, and we talked about this when we were there, saying at 180 degrees, you get this beautiful light glowing in the distance.
I hope he's been able to sort of catch up with us with the failure of the link, but he'll be able to watch it on YouTube. The question I wanted to ask you about this particular photograph compared to the previous set, this is obviously taken with your Mamiya because of the 4x5 crop on it. Is that correct?
And it's a lot older as well. I mean, I actually got lots of cameras, and as much as I don't like to talk about them, I'm a massive gearhead. I love equipment. And I've currently got about, in terms of systems, I've got like I've got 4 Mamiya 7s at the moment. I've got 1 broken one, so that's 5 in total. I've got 3 Hasselblad bodies, and I've had people saying to me, why are you using a Hasselblad if you've got a Mamiya 7? And it's just, I think that sometimes, well, with the Mamiya 7, it's a rangefinder, so you can't go super wide and you can't go serious telephoto. And I also convinced that when you walk out the door with a certain aspect ratio in your hands, you arrive at a different composition.
Yep.
You know, a lot of people tell me in the workshops, say, well, I'm going to crop this later on. And I'm saying, I don't think you really find or fine-tune the composition enough on location by thinking about, I'm going to crop it later on when I get back. I think you find it, if you turn up with a square, you'll really find more stronger squares. That's my belief in it. Anyway.
No, I think that's very good advice, because I think that we're seeing now. I'm just going to come out of screen share.
Sure.
Just bear with me one sec. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
That was great to hear what you had to say about your images there, Bruce. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, I think that basically I would say that I think we're seeing now a situation where a lot of photographers are now really starting to think about the amount of gear that they're actually taking out with them when they go shooting, whether it's street photography or landscape photography. I think there's still this thing with digital. I'll call it 35mm for as a collective using a DSLR. I still think there is a feeling with the landscape photographers that they've got to take all lenses to cover the aspects that they might run into, 28mm, 35mm, 24-70, 72-10s, and all the bigger stuff. And then I think you get to a situation where the street photographer, though, is basically one who says 1 camera, 1 lens. That's what I'm going to take, because like me, on my street photography, I'll just take my Fuji with the 23mm, and that's a 1.5 crop, so that's a 50mm lens on that. So I think you're starting to see a little bit of a different attitude with regards to the amount of equipment. And I think you're right that when you basically make a decision of what you're going to take, that in actual fact sends you down that line and adds to your learning and your your project that you've set out to do in the first place.
I totally agree, and I've actually said to the point of people, what I've said to quite a few clients when I'm spending time with them is that they'll say they find it very hard to compose, and I say, well, zooms on the surface of it, they seem like they're the great thing because they've got all these different focal lengths built in, it's really convenient, whatever. But until you understand how all these different focal lengths work, it's quite difficult, and so you got too many options. And if I gave somebody, you know, this old adage about, you know, what's the best lens on the one that's on the one that's on the camera, it's a bit like that. So for me, I've said to people, well, look, just go and tape that zoom at 24mm and work at 24mm for the next 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
Because what will happen is if you're just working at one focal length for a long time, you start visualizing everything in that focal length. It becomes second nature. You start turning up at places straight away. You can see compositions in that focal length. So, and the reason why I say that is because that's exactly what I did. With the Mamiya 7 that I've got, I had the 80mm for it for ages, and then it took me about a year before I finally got around to getting a wide angle for it. And then I had a 50 and basically I had the equivalent of a 24 and a 50mm for about 8 years. And that's all I did most of my shots. And every time I turned up at a place, I'd look at something and straight away I made a decision. It's a wide angle. No, it's not. It's standard lens. And a dear friend of mine, my Swiss friend Sonia, she was she dumped digital and went to film about 3 years ago, and she bought a Mamiya 645. And I was standing in a place, Jökulsárlón Beach in Iceland with her about 2 years ago, and she said to me, "This is great." She said, "I've found out that I only need 2 lenses."
Yeah.
And I thought, fantastic. I thought that's brilliant, because, and she said, when I turn up somewhere, I know exactly what I'm going to do because I can visualize in each lens. And I said, yes. And just to get further onto that, you're talking about street photography, and sometimes I think there's a lot of parallels with it. And I love how Michael Kenner, for example, talks about portraiture. He talks about when he takes a picture of a tree, that he's not taking a picture of a tree, he's doing a portrait. And he tries to be very respectful to them, to the landscape that he's around. And I see the same thing too with landscapes. I think it is very much about that. And I think that I'd much rather go out there with give me one lens that I prefer. Like I really love my 50mm and my Mamiya 7. That's the wide angle lens, or give me the 80, and I can go out there and I can find compositions with it, no trouble.
Yeah.
So I think that when you turn up with too many focal lengths and things like that, I think it just makes decisions difficult, and I don't think you ever get around to mastering what's actually going on with those lenses. Why?
Totally agree with you. I think one thing that I found when I had my Nikon bag, and as I mentioned to you last night, my Nikon bag of just in case gear, with a Nikon D200, D50, a 28mm, a 35mm, a 50, a 2870, all those things. You start as a photographer or as a hobbyist, whatever you want to call it, and you start thinking to yourself, right, I'm going to take some photographs with my 35. Oh, should I have the 28-300 on, or should I have? And you don't start concentrating on what you want to do, which is to take photographs. You start worrying about the composition, don't you?
For me, they're an interface, and they're at the moment they're a clumsy interface, because ultimately what you really want is just to be able to look at something with your own eye and say that's a photo and capture it, right? And because you can't do that, you've got to put something between you and the image of what you're seeing, and that's a camera. So if it's complicated, if you don't understand the menu system on it, you're not familiar with it, or if it keeps stopping you or slowing you down, get rid of it. That's what I do. I've had countless people turn up with me with cameras where they don't understand how they work. And I'll say to them, you need to get really familiar with this, because what I like about my little Mamiya 7 is it's got an aperture priority mode in it and manual. That's all it's got on it. Yeah. And I know I've been using it for so many years now that it's second nature. It's muscle memory. It's I just automatically know what I'm going to go and do before I do it. I don't have to think, and it doesn't stop me. So yeah, definitely. And so very much so about focal lengths as well, as get to know your focal lengths. If you're a 35mm full frame shooter, I would go out there with a 24 and a 50 for the next 5 years. Just work with those 2 focal lengths. That's all you need.
Yeah.
And if you're
very good comment. Very good.
And if you're like, I love the little the Fujifilm cameras, but I can't get my head around the focal lengths on those ones. But the Lumix systems, for example, the Micro Four Thirds, that would be the equivalent of like I think it's 12mm and a 25mm. just those two for a while.
Yeah.
And then what happens for that is if you're using that the wide angle lens all the time for your compositions, you understand how far you can get away with the depth of field. You know, oh yes, when I'm a meter in front of my foreground, I know that I can get the foreground to background in focus every time I do this.
Yeah.
Because with my Mamiya 7, I never actually ever focus it. I just set it to the hyperfocal on the lens. I know exactly what I can get away with on the camera.
Yeah.
And once it's out there, I don't even have to think about it anymore. I'm just working on what's actually out in the landscape.
It's muscle memory, isn't it? I know exactly what you mean.
It's kind of counterintuitive. You think that having a zoom is going to make it more flexible for you, but I've actually had quite a lot of clients of mine that over the years, they've come on the first workshop with me with a zoom, and by the end of it, I've convinced them to go home and just get rid of it and get some primes, and they come back a year later and they've got 2 primes on them.
Yeah.
And it's really helped me, because as soon as I put the 24 Zeiss on, or the 25 Zeiss on my D800, that's what I'm working with. So if there's anything that's not working in the composition, I maybe have to nudge back on the tripod and nudge forward just to move something in or out of the frame. And I'm also getting used to its characteristics, you know. So.
Yeah. Do you have any problems yourself? Obviously, with you concentrating using the Mamiya and the Hasselblad from time to time, do you have any major problems for yourself when a client who's on your workshop turns up with a digital camera? How do you get around the situation where the guy's totally blank, doesn't understand what he's using, and he can't get around his menu? How do you get around that?
Right. Well, straight away, usually what I find is the Canons. For some reason, the Nikons, the menu systems are so convoluted on them that it's very rare that I actually usually meet anybody that actually knows that menu system back to front. If you ask anybody how to change to a 5:4 aspect ratio in it, it's you'll quickly get lost in it for 5 or 10 minutes. Yep. So usually I try and do a little prep at the beginning of the, when we meet the first night. I try and give them a bit of a heads up about, this is what I want you to use while I'm here. I'm not really bothered about all the techie stuff on the camera. My personal preference is to go for aperture priority, because as soon as you put the grads on it, the camera just knows how to automatically balance out the exposure for you. It's like a seesaw effect, and that's the way I kind of describe it. I say if you put the right strength of grad on the sky, the camera knows how to balance out the ground. It's not just about darkening the sky down. It tends to, what happens when you darken the sky down, the ground gets brighter as a result, because the camera goes, oh, well, everything's supposed to be 18% grey. Yeah. And because Bruce has darkened the sky down so much, now I better lift the whole exposure up. So the whole exposure gets brighter and the ground gets brighter. And I'm saying, well, so it's all about just balancing it with the right kind of grad. And once you do that, the exposure's right, check the histogram and just get into the habit of repeatedly checking the histogram. And don't trust the screen, because I've had a lot of clients tell me that, oh, the picture looked too bright on the back of the screen, but they're shooting in darkness. And I'm saying, well, anything's going to look too bright in the back of the screen. You can't trust the screen for your exposure. You can trust it for getting ideas about your composition. You can't trust it for color. So what you do is you just use it to help you work at your composition, and then use your histogram to check out whether you've got the exposure about right.
Yeah, that's another very good point there.
Another thing I say to them is, if the sky looks really dramatic on the back of your preview screen, if it looks really Mordory and dramatic and like you've almost done your Photoshop work on it, you've probably overcooked it.
Yeah, yeah. Been down that route before myself.
It's just,
tell us, Bruce, about your workflow from using your Mamiya or your Hasselblad. Do you actually process the film yourself, or do you put that to a third party?
No, I've done it third party for a long time, and anybody that's been watching my blog for a while will understand that I've been having problems trying to get good processing for the last year or two now.
Yeah.
When I've looked into this, I've actually found out that film sales hit their all-time low in 2009, and since then there's been a gradual rise in it. I mean, it's paled into insignificance compared to what it once was.
Oh, yeah.
But in terms of it dying, I just don't really think that's going to happen now. And there's lots of little cottage industries coming up with new films all the time.
Yeah, that's right.
But the problem is that I think that the skills of the guys that are working in the labs, I think they're just retiring and going home, and that's it. So I've actually found that there's now a couple of labs that I'm using. There's a fantastic lab in the north of England called AG Photographic. If you're having problems getting good film processing, use them. Brilliant, absolutely fantastic. So I'm really pleased with them. And but I actually have bought my own little film processor. I did it 2 weeks ago, and I've not mentioned it in my blog yet because I'd much rather find it if it's going to go anywhere first.
Sure.
But I'm going to carry on with that, and everybody might be arguing, well, why are you bothering with film anymore? And I think there's a look to it, there's an aesthetic that I really like about it that gets me inspired, so that's the way I want to work with it. So I'm going to carry on with that. In terms of workflow, so what happens is I get the transparencies home, and I've got this nice little Jeppy light table at home, and I'll stick them on the light table, but I don't like to look at every single image on the entire batch in one go, because I tend to get a bit overwhelmed, and then I feel a sense of pressure because I'm thinking, oh, they're all so good, or there's too many good ones here, and there's also crap ones here, and where I start, and it all gets really complicated for me. So what I like to do is I just I open up the envelope, and I just take out one sheet at a time, put it on the light table, and I look at them and I say, right, okay, out of these 10 or 12 shots, I really like this one, and I like this one, I'll scan them. And so that'll happen throughout over a week, and I like to spend a week at home just immersed in it all. I've got music on in the background, and I just like to relive the whole experience. And so I'll go through them one by one, working on them, and then I'll get to the bottom of the sheets. And then once I've done all that, I say to myself, right, let's go back to the beginning, because now that I know all the shots and how everything came out in the collection of work, I've gotten to know each sheet or each roll of film really well. Let's go back through them again, because I've probably missed a few. And I'll maybe scan some other ones that maybe I just wasn't really sure whether I was going to work on them or not. So once I scan them, I don't tend to like doing batch scanning, so I won't tend to scan like 10 or 20 of them and then work on them. I like to sort of like find something on the light table, oh, that really, I'm feeling really quite enthused by this one, really quite inspired by it, and I'll pick it and I'll scan it. And I've got a really high quality scanner at home, and it takes a long time to learn to scan really well. So I kind of know exactly what I'm looking for when I'm trying to scan. And once I've scanned it, then I don't like to spend too much time in it, but I'm really comfortable in Photoshop, and I use masks and layers and curves all the time. These are my tools, and I'm so familiar and so comfortable with it now. It's become second nature, a bit like what we were talking about with the camera gear, Paul.
Yeah.
So I don't really like to sort of mess around with things too much. And every time that I go on a trip with them, somebody says to me, you should try this, Bruce, or you should try this new tool or this thing, I'm really quite wary of it. And it's not because of any kind of technophobic side of it, because I'm actually quite a techie guy. It's more just that if you found a process and it's working, don't mess with it.
Yeah, exactly right.
If it's working for you, just get on with it. Just get on with making images. That's really what it's about.
Yeah.
So I scan them, and then I don't tend to work on them for too long, 5-10 minutes, and then I save them. And then what I do is I like to do a review. So 2 or 3 days later, I'll look at them again, and the moment I pop them up on the screen, whatever I think or feel, I trust it, because your gut reaction, it's your gut reaction. That's what it's telling you. You've either overdone it, you've overdone the contrast on it, the color's looking a bit weird or freaky on it, or whatever it is, or maybe you've not gone far enough in it. Something's bothering you about it. And then I do a quick change, nip and tuck on it in some way, save it again. And then about 4 days later, I'll come back and look at them again. And the reason why I'm trying to avoid looking at them too much is because I think what will happen is that you get bored of them, or you can't see the wood for the trees anymore. It's like staring at that document proposal that you're writing for work. It's, you've tried fine-tuning the text so much that you're not sure if it's sounding right anymore. So that's why I try and do it. I try and keep it fresh. And then once I've finished them, it's done. I don't like to look at my work too much.
So it's interesting you say that, actually, because one of my interviews a number of episodes back was with Rincy Ruiz, who is a street photographer from Los Angeles. And he said exactly the same thing as what you just mentioned there. He uses a Fuji digital camera going out on the street. He'd come back, he's taken about 96 images, which at the time was probably about half of what I would normally have taken. Uh-huh. And then he'd download them into Lightroom, and then he'd leave them. He'd walk away. He would then basically go back and look at them a day later, see which one was, star out the base of his favorites from that, probably par it down to about 30, and then he'd go away, and then he'd come back, and then he'd par again down to about 15, and then he'd work on those 15. And basically what he said, and I've used this term quite a bit, what he's doing is marinating his photographs. He's letting the photograph develop basically from the moment that he's taken the image out on the street, not getting home, rushing it, banging it out onto any blog or social network. Because as you say, and I think you make a very, very good point, how many times do you do that and then come back and look at the image and went, I've overcooked that. I've put too much contrast in it. I haven't done this and I haven't done that. So I think it's a very good point to sort of develop as you go along with an image rather than trying to rush it and get it out fast. Yeah,
it's a relationship. And like any relationship, sometimes you've got to think on it. You've got to go away and consider it and see about, does it feel right? And if you're writing a proposal for work, you unless you're on a strict deadline for it, you'll write a couple of drafts for it and you'll review it on a fresh mind the following day.
Yeah.
Then you read paragraphs and you think, well, what does that say? It doesn't make sense anymore. And I think that part of being a good photographer is ultimately about quality control. And you don't really want to show everybody your dirty underwear. So it's so interesting. I remember I wrote about this on my blog years ago, and I was showing everybody, look, I started off with 80 rolls of films, which is 10 shots per roll. So that's about 800 shots. And I ended up with about 20, 30 pictures that I really liked. And somebody wrote back to me and he said to me, that it's so nice to hear that you take crap pictures too. And I thought, well, of course I do, but everybody does. But I give myself permission to. If you don't create, you've got to explore. You've got to be. Every time you take up a camera to start a new picture, I don't know what's going to happen, and I like that because you've got to surprise. Just be open to the whole thing. And likewise, when you're reviewing your work, I don't try and hold too much onto it in ego and I want it to be this thing, and it didn't work out the way I wanted it to be. What I try and do is I actually deliberately leave my pictures for 3 or 4 weeks before I actually work on them, because by the time I actually look at them, I actually can't remember what I was trying to do with them.
Well, that's another thing. You made a good point in what you said earlier on. You don't want to get bored with the photographs you've taken. You want to be looking at them with a generosity of love in the image that you've created.
And also, you want to be quite objective about it. You want to be really honest about what is there, because I think part of being a good photographer is hopefully about a sense of objectivity about what you're doing, and actually being able to look at it as a third person. So it's almost like you didn't create it. It's like somebody else did. So you can be quite more honest with yourself about it, rather than sort of, because that's part of the problem is when you really wanted an image to come out a certain way and it didn't. I think sometimes, or what happens sometimes, is you build into your mind what you think the image is, and yet it's not really that. You think, later you look at it and you go, I thought it was quite good, but it's not really that good. Why did I think it was so good? And it's basically because you were too much in love with it. You were too close to it.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, there's that aspect to it. So some of it's, but also it's all about just being emotionally connected to it. Really, it's about trying to get that kind of.
Yeah, you're building into the photograph after the initial taking of the image. You're building into it, and as you develop it through.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your inspiration, because I'm going to hold back the favorite photographer bit. Who would you has been the person that's inspired you the most with your photography?
Yeah, well, I had a good. You asked me this yesterday, Paul, and I had a good think about it today, and I would like to give. I'd like to nominate my 2 music teachers when I was at school, and it's probably not what you're expecting, but because they were quite a bit of a radical bunch, the 2 of them, Tom and Graham. They were very non-establishment, and they didn't care about the fact that I didn't want to go down and learn how to play an instrument and learn to read music. They were very much about encouraging me to explore and just experiment with what I was doing. And I've got massive thanks to them, because I think what they taught me at an early age was how to remain in touch with my creativity, with whatever it is I'm doing. Because I think there's part of me that I can sort of disappear into a dream world, and I can visualize things and imagine things, and that's helped me greatly, even with my business, visualizing what I'm going to do with my business, where it's going to go, with the photography, everything. And so they were very inspiring that way. I think I think is quite interesting for me is that I've actually found myself now in a teaching role. And one of them's now passed away. Graham passed away 10 years ago, and I know that he would be, if he was around, he'd be absolutely so delighted about the fact that I'm out there just trying to sort of encourage or help other people along with photography, and so that's a really cool thing.
That's lovely, and it's not surprising that you do come up with someone different. I've had many Some photographers have been inspired by their children. Some have been inspired by their lecturers or friends at university, mums, dads, and all sorts of things. So it doesn't, as I said to you yesterday, it doesn't necessarily have to be a photographer.
No, it doesn't. And
That inspired you.
If you don't mind me saying it, I also think that you get inspiration from lots of things. I love music and I listen to lots of music, and I find that sometimes when I go traveling on certain trips, I play a brand new album when I'm on a location somewhere, and find that becomes very associated to it, emotionally associated to it. And then I find that I actually find that it seems to conjure up a certain mood or a feeling for me. And I'm sure, and when I'm editing my work, I actually like to put on those kind of pieces of music in the background.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, lovely.
It helps me get into that whole zone, you see.
Yeah. So, right, let's talk about your favorite photographer then. And
well, come on,
who would that be?
Oh, well, you know, even on a personal level, he's fantastic. Well, Michael Caine, it's a bit of an obvious one, really, isn't it? I mean, I like lots of different types of photographers. I've got like Edward Bernteski's books here. I've got Ragnar Axelson's books. I love a lot of street photography, all the Magnum photographers, Elliot Erwitt.
Yeah.
Massive fan of Elliot Erwitt. I think they're very, very funny photographs. So, you know, there's quite a lot of different types of photography I like, but it's quite interesting. I've got a friend of mine that owns a photographic bookshop, and he deals with a lot of really well-known photographers, and he told me, he said, you know, the stuff they buy is usually nothing to do with the style that they take pictures from.
I concur with that. I can concur with that.
You know, and I love lots of different things, and I think the photography art form is just a very open thing.
I think it's so important. Sorry to interrupt you. I think it's so important. A lot of people that I speak to don't have a favorite photographer, believe it or not. You know, they think, no, whether it's they don't want to actually state who it is in case they think that they're copying that individual, I don't know. But there are so many photographers that don't even buy books, you know, because they don't want to study a book in case they end up copying it. And I'm going, no, you're taking this totally out of the wrong context. You get an opportunity to pick up a book, it'll be Cartier-Bresson, Eugene Atget, Brassai, Joseph Kudelka, all these photography books that I've got up there. As you're going through these books, you are learning. You are learning about classic photography, how it was done with equipment which I couldn't use. And basically, it's the whole educational process of photography, which I think is so important, which you get an opportunity to get these books and see them. I've got the Ansel Adams books here as well. Yeah. I'm not a landscape photographer by any stretch of the imagination. And it's so important to get these books. You
know, I've been saying to everybody for a while in my workshops and even on my blog as well, saying that you can learn a lot from looking at other people's work. And I find it quite interesting that a lot of people look at websites, but you get a lot more out of the actual experience from looking at printed books.
Yeah, very true.
And sometimes I get emails from people. I released a book about 6 years ago, and I remember when I came out with it, I had somebody emailed me and he said to me, I can release a PDF version of this. He said, I'm not interested in owning the book. I just want to read what you've said. I want to learn. And I wrote back to him and I said, well, I was starting to offer the book. You could buy the book and you get a PDF with it. And I said, well, if you buy the PDF, you get the book free. But I was just joking with him. But what I was really trying to say, and I did say to him as well, I said, you know, you learn a lot from looking. And getting back to my favorite photography, if you like, well, I think Michael's taught me so much because I had the luxury this year of spending about almost a week with him in the north of Scotland. And what was quite interesting about it was I told him I actually found his photography before I was even a photographer. I was actually in a newsagent's, Aris McCall's, and I remember looking at the shelf, not the top shelf, but the shelf, and there was a picture. And I just went, what the hell's that? And he was laughing when he looked at me. And I said, well, because it was that picture. It's the one of the one in Hastings, if you know it quite well. It's of the beach at night with these kind of wooden planks. And it kind of looks like a negative. And I was mesmerized by it. And I just don't know what the hell it was. So I bought the magazine based on that.
On that photograph, yeah.
And I do think he's coined a style. I think he's coined a style that's been heavily plagiarized, but that's fine because Michael's very open about the idea that he's got his influences too, and so you've got to start with something, and you do. And so I think he's given me an awful lot, and sometimes it's a real compliment when people tell me that, oh, you're a Michael. I've had a couple of people tell me you're Michael Caine in color, which is quite a nice thing, you know, and I can see some similarities there. I'm not deliberately using square because of Michael or anything, but certainly the simplification. I looked at his books. I mean, his beautiful Hokkaido book.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's almost like a lesson in just how to compose very cleanly.
Yeah, I got two of his books myself, which is France and Japan. Beautifully bound books, beautiful work in itself, in the book itself.
And I think
But if you look at those images, there's so much to learn from them.
yeah, and I think photography really is about the print anyway. I think at the end of the day,
Yes.
it's about getting the stuff out, and it's. I've actually got one client of mine, dear client of mine, Nori, who lives up in Fife, and Nori told me that he's got a paper fetish, and I said to him, "Well, I don't think you're alone there. I think a lot of people that are into photography love some photography.
Yeah.
If you've Michael Kenner's Huang Shan book is printed on uncoated paper, and it's like a Japanese rice paper. It's got this beautiful texture to it.
Yeah.
And I just think that's part of the experience too, really, isn't it? It's that whole tactile thing about
Very, very much so. I couldn't agree more with you. And interesting enough, another photographer which I came across a little while ago, David Brookover, who's from Wyoming. He very kindly sent me one of his books, and his work. When he prints the work, in actual fact, the paper they use is a unique Japanese material, which is made by centuries old recipes that have been handed down from family to family, and this paper is very, very expensive, and all his work is printed on that. And his work is very Ansel Adams style. Takes a lot of the national parks out in America, which immediately gives you that link to Ansel Adams. But there's no doubt about it. Once you get a book, a good quality book, and you just able to flick through the pages and just study and absorb yourself into someone's work. My favorite photographer of all time would be Sol Leiter, the street photographer from New York. And I got one of the little photo file books. And I love looking through that. But when I eventually bought his book, which I can't find it at the moment, I think it's called In Color. It was a totally different aspect because the images were slightly bigger, but turning over the paper of a little bit of better quality than what was in the photo file book was just awesome. It just sort of changed the whole aspect of looking at his work.
Yeah, I remember I got a couple of emails from people saying to me, "I've been watching your website for a long time, and I love your images." And I got the book, and I discovered there was so much more detail in the book,
Yeah.
and even the printing of books now has gotten so good.
Yeah.
Like lens work. We were talking about lens work last night.
Yeah.
Brooks,
Yeah.
and Brooks says that himself now. He says that he was kind of arguing the point, but he wasn't really being serious about it. He was saying that about whether it was worth going to see this Edward Weston exhibition because you could buy a book of Edward Weston's work now and it's printed just as well as. I mean, he was being silly, but he was deliberately being so. What he was really trying to point out was the print quality of books is really good, but of course, going to see the exhibition is a nice experience anyway. And
unless I might add, you stand too close to a particular image. I've got to tell you this little story. There was an exhibition down in Greenwich of Ansel Adams' work, and these prints were just enormous. You know, you're talking 6 to 8 foot square, that sort of size. And I saw this fella standing literally a foot away from the image, and I frowned at him and I looked at him and he says. Yeah. And he looked at them and he went, "Bit grainy, aren't they?" So you know, so they would be standing about a foot away. Just step back a little way and enjoy them from a suitable viewing distance. And he's about 8 foot. And he went, "Oh, I see what you're talking about now."
I think what happens with photography is it attracts people from all different avenues. So you'll get some people that are very technically minded,
yeah,
or they come from an engineering background. And so maybe the reason why they get into it is because of the f-stops, the shutter speeds, the equipment, that aspect of it. And then you also get the people that I feel very much I'm coming from an arty point of view. I'm just painting, if you like. If I used to do oil paints and everything when I was younger. And I just think that for me, it's all about the emotion. And I'd much rather look at a grainy, out of focus picture that, those Normandy beach shots from...
Robert Capa.
Robert Capa. You know, I know there's all this kind of talk about whether they were staged or not, but if disregarding that, just looking at the pictures themselves, there's something about them, and I think that's what it is. When every time you look at an image, you're just taking in it's a spell that you're being put under. That's
Yeah,
what it
very true.
that's what it should be.
I was just looking off to the side here, actually, because there is a book which I was looking at a couple of days ago, and I can't actually put it. It was something about photography out of focus. I can't actually find it. I'll put it on when I put the blog out. I'll put the blog out over the weekend, and I'll put that book in there because it does talk about why do photographs have to be in focus. And you mentioned Robert Capa, but you look at Daido Moriyama, for argument's sake. You know, I think you could count on one hand how many photographs that Daido has made which are in 100% focus from front to back. Totally blurred, totally unfocused, and they capture an image, they capture a soul, they capture, you know, a feeling of what's actually going on the street, which is effectively a street photographer.
It's almost as if there's a sense of people feeling that is this okay? Am I allowed to do this? Is this right? Is this wrong? And the reason why I say that as well is because I hear people tell me that. They ask, am I doing right? Is this okay? And I'm thinking, well, do you like it? That, you know, do you feel you're going somewhere with this? Yes. And I've got many images in my own portfolio that, you know, I just think, well, they weren't as sharp as I wanted, or I had to sacrifice the depth of field. I knew something had to give somewhere to get the composition I wanted. When you're with a medium format camera, the depth of field's much shallower. You see, I mean, a wide angle lens is a 50mm, but it's still got the depth of field properties of a 50mm, pretty shallow. So sometimes I can't quite get all that, and I've got one or two shots that I could point out to you and say to you, well, I know for a fact that I sabotaged the background for this one, but I think it works. I think the picture ultimately still has an emotion and a mood, and that's why it's up on my website.
Yeah, no, you're quite right to show that sort of work, because I think sometimes when the digital camera comes along, all you got is the pixel people saying, "Oh, look at this! This is so sharp." You've got 16, you've got 25, you've got 50 megapixel now cameras with the Canons, and everyone's saying, "Oh, look at this superb quality! Look at this superb sharpness!" And everyone gets down that line of getting everything in focus and in sharpness. And there's so much to be learned by probably turning off the autofocus of your camera and just whacking the manual focus straight out of vision and see what you can get by a blurred image.
Surprising yourself. And I've actually found sometimes I've gotten home and something got screwed up and it didn't come out the way anywhere close to what I was even hoping it to be, but I've liked it. And I said, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know it. Well, that's quite interesting. I think I'll try some more of that in future.
Exactly right, yeah. And coming back on the Robert Capa images, as we know, I think it was 3 or 4 films were destroyed in the lab when the guy overcooked them in the drying cupboard. And of course, we ended up with these very, very iconic images as they were getting off the boats and storming the beaches.
They've got
all the action going on. You know, it's like they're finding private rhyme, wasn't it, or something?
I do think there's an awful lot of analysis paralysis really about things. It's very much about overthinking it and just trying to go with it. And you know, when I met with Michael earlier this year, he was saying, you know, I was asking him about his process, and it turned out it doesn't really have one. And it's so fascinating to discover that. And I think the reason why he's done it is, well, he did say, once you understand the latitude of your film and you know exactly what you can do with the parameters, it's almost a case of now you want to go and unlearn it. You want to just go out there and just explore and just do things. And I think that's right. I think that's true. I think you have to go through a stage of trying to figure out all the correct things. And it's like you learn how to ride a bicycle, you learn how to balance. And once you learn how to balance, then you try and forget it.
Yeah.
You just go on with riding a bike.
As they say, when you learn photography, you learn the rules of photography, the rule of thirds, and all the business and everything else. And then once you know those, then you've got to go back and start again and see if you can successfully break them and create a decent image.
And it's a journey. I think photography is a creative endeavor. It's a journey, and it's I'm never quite sure where it's going. I'm always trying to make sure that it's moving in its own direction and giving it its own space and time to do that with. For example, I've got this summer, I've got 2 or 3 months off, and I'm just trying to stay away from cameras altogether at the moment because it's healthy for me to do that. Just because
recharge the batteries.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and just find other things that are going to inspire you for a moment, you know.
And I think that's important, actually. I do read quite a few people. What do you do when you've got a log jam where you don't know what to take? And the best thing to do is just put the camera down and walk away,
Yeah.
or maybe get a totally different camera than what you're used to. Like, for instance, I've always suggested picking up an iPhone and using the Hipstamatic app and doing that sort of something totally different.
I've had times where I've gone down somewhere and I've thought it's not working today, and I can feel I'm out of sorts, I'm not feeling right, I'm just feeling really tired or miserable or something. And sometimes I'm thinking, well, look, just pack up, just go. And actually, on the way back to the car, I find something.
Yeah, that's another. And actual fact, that point I would like to add is that how many times do you actual fact think you're working on an image, you're trying to get that image right, and you keep on working and keep on, and in the end you went, do you know what? I might as well just throw this image away because it's not going to work. I'm overcooking it.
You know it. And I've often said to people, how are you feeling about this? When you're here and you take this picture, you feeling excited, you feeling engaged in it, and obviously the answers vary, and you'll get people saying, yeah, I really like this, and other times they'll say to me, no, not really. And then I'm using that as a cue to say, well, why are you still here then?
Yeah.
Because the moment you move on, start working somewhere else, you've opened yourself to new experiences, and
Exactly.
sometimes that's all you're needing.
Yeah.
And because I'm the music parallel, Paul, I know lots of musicians that they'll tell me, and also some really famous ones. I've read interviews with them. They've said things like, couldn't write the song, it wasn't coming, so I just decided to go and have a cup of tea, and sometimes that's all right.
Yeah, exactly. Bruce, thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's just one of those things where we lost the link and we had to restart. So this is going to probably take a little while to load back onto YouTube, but we'll get that sorted out. Thank you so much for joining me, and an insight basically to how your photographic mind works, which is really, really great. Super stories. I hope everyone that's been watching, we've got some viewers back online, which was really great. I hope you've enjoyed the show just as much as I have been presenting it for you. Suffice to say, if you're going out shooting, I'm repeating myself, if you're going out shooting this weekend, leave your camera bag at home. All the best to you. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Cheers then.
Bye. Stay there, Bruce. And